Have you ever stopped to wonder who that I is that creates your thoughts? Or where that inner voice comes from that narrates everything you do? And although it might sound a bit strange at first, that you trying to find the truth outside is, paradoxically, the main obstacle to discovering it. Krishnamurti once said something revealing. When the observer realizes that he is the observed, understanding arises. This phrase, as delicate as it is profound, urges us to completely break away from how we understand ourselves. And it's not just a pretty phrase to share on spiritual social media. It's a radical shift in perspective that can completely unravel your existence. Or perhaps, for the first time, put it in its rightful place. All of us at some point feel the overwhelming weight of constant self-observation, that voice that won't leave us alone, not because of what others say, but because of our own judgment. We act, and immediately, that inner narrator appears. That was good, bad, right. That commentator is like a sports announcer narrating a play he himself designed. And the most curious thing is that despite all that mental noise, we still believe that this is who we are. But what if that voice is nothing more than background noise? What if the true you is that silent witness, the one who listens without intervening, without judging, without noise? What if instead of trying to silence that voice, you began to observe who is listening? This video is not a journey to a different place, but an intimate recognition. What you are seeking is already you. The consciousness that tries to understand the world around it is the same consciousness that creates that reality. And the moment this is revealed, maybe, just maybe, something quiet awakens, something that has always been with you. Let's go together to the heart of this mystery. And who knows, that maybe at the end, you won't need answers anymore, because the questions will have dissolved. Many who begin an inner journey make a basic and entirely understandable mistake. When they close their eyes and observe inside, they think that the mental voice commenting on everything is the true witness. But it is not. This misunderstanding is so common that even experienced meditators spend years trapped in it. It's like asking a crowd to be silent while they're shouting. The mind is so good at imitating consciousness that it confuses itself. This error takes a very specific form, the inner commentator. It mainly appears in three versions: the narrator, the judge, and the cheerleader. It's the voice that evaluates you while you meditate, the one that narrates your day as if it were a script, the one that punishes you when you fail and flatters you when you succeed. But more than anything, it's the one that always tries to tell you who you are. The curious thing is that it seems to be apart from you, like a calm presence watching from above. But that is nothing more than another mask, the ego disguised as consciousness. Imagine for a moment that you are in a cafe. You hear conversations, the clinking of cups, a laugh from a distant table. Now imagine that instead of enjoying your coffee, you only pay attention to all the murmurs around you. That voice commenting inside you is nothing more than a mental murmur you mistook for your true self. It seems to be an impartial witness, but in reality, it is just an automatic replay. It doesn't truly observe, it only reacts. The authentic witness, on the other hand, has no voice. It doesn't analyze, it doesn't judge. It doesn't say, this is right or this is wrong. It simply is. Watch that mental narrator in action. Notice its ups and downs without getting involved. Not because you are apathetic, but because you have already understood that none of those voices represent you. As Krishnamurti said, The observer is the same as the observed, and when that is clearly seen, division disappears. That inner voice is a mental construct born from your past. It feeds on your fears, your aspirations, your wounds, and your memories. It was shaped by your childhood, your environment, your experiences, and your unconscious desires. That is why it changes all the time. One day it calls you useless and the next brilliant, always fluctuating without consistency. This is why it's so hard to realize you are not that voice, because it feels so close. It knows your most vulnerable spots. But closeness is not the same as identity, and just because something sounds familiar doesn't mean it's true. The moment of clarity comes when you experience that small gap between one thought and the next. That fleeting second, perhaps almost imperceptible, when you are not thinking but fully aware. You are not judging or commenting, you are simply present. That is the true witness, the one who observes the chaos without getting lost in it, the one who perceives fear without fleeing, the one who sees love without clinging, the one who acknowledges sadness without rejecting it. There in that space, real transformation can arise. Because when you clearly see that you are not that inner voice, you stop fighting it. And the most surprising thing is that by not resisting, it begins to fade away. And in that silence, you discover yourself. The most common mistake is trying to find the witness as if it were something separate, as if it were a safe place to hide. But it is not something external. It is the very space where everything happens. And once you recognize it, there is nothing more to do. As Alan Watts said, you don't need to become yourself. You already are. If that sounds liberating to you, it's because it truly is. But it is only the beginning. There is something deeply unsettling about realizing that the most essential part of you has no words, no judgments, and doesn't try to change anything. It only observes. That true observer doesn't need to be right, doesn't correct, doesn't justify. It doesn't interfere or try to control. It simply remains like the sky that embraces every cloud, without ever becoming one of them. That witness is silence, but not an empty or inert silence. It is a living silence, full of attention. It is present when you get angry, when you laugh, when you fall in love, when you feel fear. It is here right now as you receive these words. But it is not that presence generating thoughts about what is being said. It is that presence observing how the thought responds. And it is precisely at this point that many people give up. The mind, always in a rush to understand and control, tries to grasp, define, and shape that inner witness. It wants to turn it into a clear idea, something that can be explained in a conversation or summed up in a clever phrase. But that witness cannot be put into words, not because it is too complicated, but because it is extremely simple. It is so present, so essential, that any mental attempt to capture it fails. Perhaps that is why so many spiritual teachers seem to contradict each other when trying to explain it. Some call it God, others the void. Some understand it as the soul, others as pure conscious presence. Krishnamurti described it as a state of attention free of choice. The Upanishads name it Atman, the eternal self, the silent witness of all experience. In Buddhism, it is called Rigpa, a naked presence beyond time and form. And for the Stoics, like Marcus Aurelius, the key was to observe thoughts with distance, serenity, and clarity, as if they belonged to someone else. Each tradition names it differently, but all point to the same experience, a pure consciousness that sees everything without confusing itself with anything. And here is what is truly beautiful. When you realize that this witness remains silent, you understand that silence is not emptiness, but the root of all vitality. Thoughts, emotions, noise, all of that changes, appears, and disappears. But that which notices those changes does not move. It is not a belief you have to adopt. It is something you can directly recognize. Have you ever lost yourself in the contemplation of the sea, of fire, or in a song that, for a moment, made you forget your identity? That state of stillness and presence was the witness revealing itself, not as something separate from you, but as what you are, without adornments or labels. And that is why this experience is universal. The consciousness that observes your thoughts now is the same that accompanied Buddha, a monk in meditation, a child distracted in play, or a thoughtful person on the Tokyo subway. Every experience is unique, but the conscious space that observes is the same. That silent witness is like a mirror. It reflects everything without holding on to anything. And the more familiar you become with that stillness, the more evident it becomes that everything you thought you were, your name, your memories, your fears, your aspirations, are passing forms floating over the unmoving background of your consciousness. The mind shouts, the witness listens, the mind analyzes, the witness contemplates, the mind seeks answers, the witness simply remains. You don't have to make any effort to be that witness. You already are. All that's needed is to notice when you get lost in thoughts and return without judgment to that presence that has always been there. And perhaps along that path, you'll discover that what you long for, calm, freedom, purpose, was never outside. It has always lived in the spaces between your thoughts, in the silences between sentences, in the emptiness that exists between you and what you perceive. The question is no longer, where is that inner witness? But rather, why do I keep choosing to forget it? There is a peculiar experience, almost impossible to describe, that we've all had, but rarely notice clearly. It is the perception that, although everything in you has changed over time, your body, your beliefs, your interests, your certainties, something has remained intact. That constant gaze behind your eyes, that silent presence that has accompanied every moment from your childhood until now. What is that which has not aged with the years? That is where it all began. When you were 5 years old and looked at life, you felt a clarity of I exist. Today, after all this time, that same feeling remains. Even though you have evolved and changed in 1,000 ways, there is something inside you that has never moved. That something does not belong to the flow of time. It witnesses change, but does not change with it. Krishnamurti said, "The observer is the observed, because when you understand that there is no separation between the one who sees and what is seen, duality disappears. There is no longer a self-perceiving and an object perceived. There is only consciousness witnessing itself in different forms. At that moment, the notion of identity dissolves completely. That presence has no name, no age, no history. It is neither in the past nor in the future. It is the stage where time unfolds but is untouched by it." Alan Watts compared this experience to a jazz piece. There is no conductor directing, but a spontaneous harmony without a defined plan, yet full of meaning. That witness is like the silence that holds the melody. This vision is so universal that it has appeared again and again throughout different cultures and periods in history. In the Upanishads, the ancient Hindu wisdom texts, it says, "The inner being does not move, but makes everything move. It is far, and at the same time very near. It is inside everything, but also outside everything. Christianity speaks of the kingdom of God within you. Zen Buddhism points to the original face before your parents were born. All these teachings invite us to see the eternal hidden within the fleeting. But why is this relevant? Why does seeing this timeless part of you deeply transform the way you relate to pain, attachment, or the fear of death? Because when you recognize that your deepest self is not bound by time, you understand that what disappears, your stories, your roles, your masks, was never truly you in essence. They were passing forms, not the source that held them. Much of our suffering comes from the constant attempt to hold on to what, by nature, changes. We cling to memories, to people, to fixed ideas about who we are, as if trying to hold water between our fingers. But everything slips away, and pain arises when we try to control what is meant to flow. The inner witness, unlike the reactive mind, does not try to grasp anything. It only watches, lets everything flow, and remains steady. That is true freedom. It's not about doing whatever you want, but about not being dragged by what you really are not. The author Eckhart Tolle, in harmony with this view, said, "You are not the voice in your head. You are the one who listens to it." And here comes an even deeper understanding. That observer does not belong to you. It's not something you can claim as your own, nor a spiritual trophy earned through effort. It is common to all beings. What varies is what passes through that space: thoughts, emotions, experiences. But the background that contains it all is the same in everyone. That's why, upon noticing the presence of the observer, something inside you lets go. Defenses fade away. The distance between you and others begins to seem like an illusion. The silence that allows you to observe is also present in others. The same stillness behind your eyes exists behind everyone's eyes. That is what the wise throughout all ages have called universal consciousness. It's not something you have to believe in. It does not require faith but attention. It's simply about sitting, being silent, and watching until the separation dissolves, until time stops rushing you, until all that remains is pure, formless awareness. As a Zen master taught, before awakening, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. During awakening, mountains are no longer mountains and rivers are no longer rivers. After awakening, mountains are mountains again and rivers are rivers again. To see from the place of the observer means that everything outside remains the same, but nothing inside is as it was. And here we arrive at an essential question. What would it be like to live from that quiet space? Not as a spiritual idea, not as occasional comfort, but as a constant, conscious practice. What if you stop trying to change the content of your thoughts and instead recognize the field that holds them all? Living from the observer means freeing yourself from the compulsive need to react. It's when something happens, an offense, a praise, a painful memory, and you don't get swept away by the immediate emotional impulse, not because you are cold or apathetic, but because you have learned not to identify with what appears. It's like sitting by a river and watching the leaves float. Some are beautiful, some are dirty, some provoke fear. Others bring melancholy. But you don't jump to catch them. You just watch them pass by. And by observing carefully, you also act with clarity. The observer is not synonymous with inaction. It is a lucid presence that allows you to respond from a place free of ego. That is true freedom. It happens at the very moment you understand that you no longer need to protect yourself from yourself. How many times have you felt trapped by thoughts you couldn't stop, or by emotions that seem bigger than you? What if, instead of fighting them, you simply looked at them, without judging, without rushing, without trying to fix them? It is in that inner space where true transformation arises, not because you struggled to change, but because you released identification with what you are not. And here is the most beautiful part of all. The more you dwell in the place of the observer, the more your compassion grows. You begin to realize that others are also prisoners of their own mental voices. They too are reacting to old wounds, defending fragile and fearful identity constructions. And when you see that clearly, a genuine understanding is born, a kind of silent tenderness toward the pain we all share as humans. It is not about feeling superior, but about recognizing a deep connection. The anger of another becomes understandable. The suffering of others touches you because what observes them is the same that observes you. As Rumi wrote, "Beyond right and wrong there is a field. I will meet you there." That awareness transforms everything. You begin to listen attentively. You start responding from calm instead of reacting impulsively. Life feels more alive. The light filtering through the window, the scent of freshly brewed coffee, the spontaneous laughter of someone across the room. Living from the inner witness is returning to the essential. It is finding serenity without running away from anything. It is feeling whole, even amidst chaos. And the most beautiful thing is that you don't need to become a new person. It's not about leaving behind your life, your responsibilities, or your character. What changes is not the experience, but the perspective from which you live it. Before, you were like an actor lost in their role. Now you are the stage where the entire scene unfolds. As a Zen teaching says, sit quietly, do nothing. The world will reveal itself. Dwelling in the place of the observer is living with presence. It is remembering moment by moment that you are the space that contains everything, not the contained. You are the consciousness, not the thoughts. You are the sky, not the clouds that pass through it. And from there, everything feels lighter. Not because difficulties disappear, but because you stop carrying them around in your mind. They come, they appear, and then they go. And you remain there steady. You have always been present. You will always be. Throughout this video, we have traveled a silent path, perhaps the deepest of all, looking inward, but not to reunite with that self weighed down by memories and labels, rather with the one who observes all that without ever being touched. The one who is here right now as you breathe, as you think, as you feel. The one who has always been present. The truth is, you don't have to reinvent yourself. You only need to remember. And it's not something achieved through effort, but through surrender. Like a leaf that stops fighting the wind and simply dances. The observer is that dance, and also the silence between each step. It doesn't need to be searched for. It just needs to be perceived. If you decide to embark on this path, you won't be the same at the end. Although truly the journey doesn't end here. It hasn't even begun, because the starting point and the destination are the same place. You won't find the observer in some illuminated future, nor when you think you have reached a perfect state. It is already here. Now, at this very moment, when you simply allow yourself to be. And if there's still a question lingering, let it be this. Who is it inside me that is asking? Before I say goodbye, I want to share something very personal with you. Some time ago, I was walking alone on a forest path, my mind full of worries and doubts. The leaves crunched beneath my feet. The fresh air brushed my face. But inside me, there was a storm of thoughts that wouldn't let me be. Suddenly, I came to a clearing where an old oak stood tall, silent, and serene. I sat in its shade, and as I looked at the roots and branches, I noticed something strange. The whisper of the wind through the leaves seemed to speak a phrase that resonated deeply, even though I didn't hear it with my ears. That phrase was simple but profound. You are not what happens, you are the one who observes it. In that instant, something changed inside me. There was no need to understand or analyze it. I just felt that truth touch a deep part, a silent presence that had always been there, but I hadn't recognized. It was the beginning of an unrepeatable change, a transformation that still guides my path today. Since then, that silent presence became my wisest teacher, and that is what I want to share with you today. It's not a theory, but a living, felt, and real experience. If you have made it this far, from the depths of my being, thank you. Thank you for opening a space inside yourself to question, reflect, and perhaps, just perhaps, discover yourself a little more. Now, before the algorithm pulls us away from this connection, subscribe to the channel. Yes, I know it might seem out of place with this contemplative depth, but even silent seekers need a strategic click. Leave us a comment with the moment that moved you the most. Who knows? Maybe your silent gaze will inspire someone lost in all the noise. Give this video a like. The button is there, waiting like an attentive observer. And watch the videos appearing on the screen. One talks about something you don't yet know you need to hear. The other, well, it's almost like looking in a mirror and discovering something new. Do you feel alone? You never were. See you in the next one.